Well, hey, hello everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, whenever you see this. I'm recording this on the evening of February 13th, 2022. I'm probably not going to be able to have it up on YouTube for viewing until tomorrow, so the date will have passed. I'm recording it tonight, though, because of the sentiment. You know, I talk a lot about when this artist was born, this artist passed, significant records, etc., etc. Today, 20 years ago, we lost maybe the architect of a term that he ended up coming to hate: outlaw country. There were certainly outlaws before this gentleman, but he really was the big, he was the clinchpin. He was like the big bang of outlaw country music, and we'll talk about that, what it meant and why. Of course, I'm talking about Waylon Jennings. Now, we remember significant events in our lives where we were. I was 20. I was still attending Grand Valley State University, and I was living at home commuting. And I remember it was on CMT Country Music Television when, they actually still played videos and concerts and talked about legacy artists. And at that point, Waylon certainly was. He had been sick with various ailments for some years. Unfortunately, he was only 67. I wrote just a couple of dates down so I would not forget. Waylon Jennings. Waylon Arnold Jennings was born in the Texas Panhandle in Littlefield on June 15th, 1937. So, crazy enough, then, he's a Panhandle rambler, just like so many of the artists I love out of Texas. But Waylon had a totally different sensibility about him. So as a young man, he had a band by the age of 12. He was a disc jockey when he was in high school. And he, as fate would have it, Littlefield is a ways up the road just northwest of Lubbock. And Lubbock's most famous son, of course, was Buddy Holly. Waylon ended up playing bass in Holly's band on the ill-fated Winter Dance Tour. We just saw that anniversary earlier this month, February 3rd, 1959. Buddy Holly, along with Ritchie Valens and J.P. Richards, the Big Bopper, passed in a plane crash. And Buddy and his band had this bus, and it was cold. The heat didn't work. It was always breaking down. Waylon ended up giving up his seat to either Ritchie Valens or the Big Bopper. I don't remember. They had chartered a plane because they were out in the northern states touring in Iowa, and it was frigid cold. And anyway, and Dion in the Belmonts, Dion gave his seat up to what would have been the other one. Anyway, Buddy Holly says to him, "I hope your old bus crashes." And bus freezes up. And Waylon says, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." They were jibing each other. And then it took Waylon decades to get over that silly little remark that he had made to Buddy Holly. And anyway, so you can hear my son up there maybe through the floor. I'm in the basement. He's a gamer. I have a video up with him, Elijah Gamer, and he's very passionate about it, just like I am with music. Anyway, so Waylon ended up commuting back and forth from Texas to Arizona in the early 60s. He ended up playing the club scene out there, put a few 45s out on various independent labels. The mid-60s, 1966, I believe, he came to Nashville, and he just did not fit the mold. I mean, you see the pictures of him, and his hair's got the Brill cream in it, and he's clean-shaven and ruggedly handsome, and he got really eaten up by the Nashville machine. He roomed with Johnny Cash for a while, and they used to joke that they were both doing pills, Quaaludes, and not Quaaludes, speed and stuff, and they would hide their pills from each other, but they both knew where they were. It ended very poorly for them both. So anyway, Waylon, where I'm coming to with the whole outlaw bit, and a lot of you probably know this if you're watching. If you don't, it's explained much better in many places. This video for me is really just kind of a tribute to Waylon and what his music meant to me. But it's always good to get some background. Um, you see my tea bag cup that my wife got me. It's great. I'm actually drinking Yorkshire Gold tea right now. I'm just coffeeed out for the day. My stomach can't take any more acid. So anyway, Waylon was, he was accustomed to playing with the Waymore Blues Band, as he called them, his road musicians. And he and his manager sat down at one point in 1971 or 72. He had released Ladies Love Outlaws as a single using his road band, and it was very successful. And so then he wanted to start using his road band, and nobody did that. The Nashville scene was run completely. It was countrypolitan at the time. The term for the very slick strings. You used the musicians that the producers told you to. You used the producers that the record labels told you to. You had zero artistic creativity except in a very few rare cases. And Waylon and his manager sat down with RCA label head Chet Atkins. Now, Chet is one of the finest guitar pickers in the history of music of any genre. There were few who could be his equal as far as ability, but he had also kind of orchestrated the Nashville sound. And I got to tell you, as a younger person, I guess, is 40 young anymore? I don't know. But somebody who wasn't there at the time, it's very boring to look back on. And Waylon and his manager sat down and drove a hard bargain, and he ended up getting to use his band. And I believe the first record, doing some research, and this one is great. It's a great title. I love it. You'll have to excuse me. I have a lot more Waylon on CD than I do vinyl. This really set the pace for the outlaw movement. Yes, the first album to reflect the new creative freedom granted by Waylon's 1972 contract. His hit record stores March 1973, Lonesome, Ornery, and Mean. And the title track really described him. It's just a hard driving song. He used Ralph Mooney on pedal steel and Richie Albright on drums, and just a killer band on here. And Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues. He covers. It's funny, Pretend I Never Happened by Willie Nelson. Willie hadn't even released that song at that point. That didn't come until 1974 on Willie's Phases and Stages. He covers Christofferson's Me and Bobby McGee. Gone to Denver, Lay It Down. Just, you can have her. This is really just to me, this is the best studio album of the early 70s for Waylon. He had a number of classics. He had Ramblin' Man. He had This Time, a couple others. The next one that I'm going to talk to you about, I guess, would be the other great one. And this is the second album to come out after his contract. This is one of the holy grails. I just got done saying that that's probably the best. I'm going to change my mind in mid-sentence here because we're allowed to. This would have been, at one point this was number 2, but it's really number 1 or 1A. Hard to say. Who cares? Honky Tonk Heroes. 9 out of the 10 songs written by, let's see, where is he? One of the holy trinity of Texas songwriters, Billy Joe Shaver. So many legendary stories. By this point, Waylon was, he was doing pills, he was on cocaine, he was hanging out with bikers and Hell's Angels, and he was tough, and he wore all black. And Waylon was just a bad son of a bitch at that time. And you didn't, once he got his freedom too, you didn't tell him what to do. And he had apparently said something to Billy Joe, about, oh, I had to do some of your songs. So Billy Joe showed up at the recording studio and said, you're going to cover my songs. And Waylon, look it up. There's a lot better descriptions than me. Basically, Billy Joe threatened to whoop Waylon and his bodyguards at the time. And, Billy was all on his own, but he was crazy as a loon, too. And thank goodness Waylon took him up on it. Honky Tonk heroes, old five and dimers like me, Willie the Wandering Gypsy and me, Low Down Freedom, Omaha, You Asked Me To, Ride Me Down Easy, Ain't No God, Mexico, Black Rose, and We Had It All. And just, come on, how do you, I'm making a fool of myself, contradicting myself here, but how do you beat this? And I don't know that any other albums did. Many came close. Lukenbach, Texas, Back to the Basics of Love is on this one, called Old Waylon. This is from 1976. If we can get it without too much glare, you can see the picture of Waylon, and that really describes exactly, you can see the attitude in that picture. It was fantastic. So by this point, he'd had quite a few successful albums, tours. He recorded these, and then 1973, he gets a call from an acquaintance, not best friends yet, but he gets a call from Willie Nelson. And Willie had very bad luck, of course, in Nashville, went back to Texas, started gathering quite a following. He was playing at a place called the Armadillo World Headquarters, where he mixed the hippies and the rednecks, and he called them hipnecks. And he said there's room for people to dance, and there's room for people who want to sit. And he called Waylon, and he said, hey, you ought to come down here. I think you'd really be big, and if you come back to Texas. And Waylon wasn't quite sure, and Willie said, oh, just trust me. And Waylon said, Willie Nelson saying trust me isn't exactly the most solid thing in the world. But he did, and he went back, and so these guys were breaking whole new ground, and they would play on each other's albums here and there. The first collaboration that wasn't a full album, but this is really the record. By this point, even by 1976, Outlaw Country was kind of becoming a cliche, but Wanted the Outlaws, and this is an OG pressing with Waylon's wife Jessie Coulter and Tom Paul Glaser. And Tom Paul was as much known as a songwriter and producer as he was singer. He was part of the Glaser brothers. But Waylon has My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys on here, and Honky Tonk Heroes. And they duet on Good Hearted Woman, which is, of course, probably the biggest hit Waylon and Willie had together, other than one I'll talk about in a second, Willie's Heaven or Hell, which both of them had done on studio before. And then the others are all on here, various configurations. But this was the first country music record to go platinum. No record had gone and sold 1 million copies before. And once this happened, that was it. And, so then Waylon and Willie were both selling records through the roof. And so it was only a matter of time before I guess I'll leave it on now. Give you a good shot. Before the Waylon and Willie record had to happen. And they would end up doing 4 full studio records together. This is the best-selling, the most famous. It might be musically the best, but it's actually not my favorite. We'll get to that in a minute. But this has Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys. And, so they duet on several songs on here. So then the year 2003, Minus 25, which was written by their friend Chris Christopherson, Pick Up the Tempo, I Can Get Off on You, Don't Cuss the Fiddle, are all duets, and then they each sing a few songs on their own using the band. And so this was, another groundbreaking record-selling album. 78 or 79, Waylon Jennings' Greatest Hits. This was Waylon's first album to go platinum. Yeah, it got mostly the 70s stuff. I think one 60s song on here, but yeah, only Daddy That'll Walk the Line was left over from the 60s. The rest is all from the 70s stuff. If you're looking to get into Waylon, this is one of the two albums I would suggest. The other, and I have a couple of different versions here. So when I was 19 is when I first heard Waylon Jennings. As part of the Highwaymen, which, you know, I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but we'll get to. Waylon Live. This is an original pressing. This was recorded in 1974 at the Texas Opry House. I have the Waylon Live, the expanded edition. The CD version I actually had was on Buddha Records. It was 20 songs. This one is 42, so it's a little much. This one is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6. The original is only 11, and this is probably the best live outlaw country record that exists. Waylon was in peak performance mode here. His band was so tight. You know, it's really a rockin' country album. The pedal steel, the harmonica, there's no fiddle. T for Texas, Rainy Day Woman, Me and Paul, which was a Willie song, The Last Letter, I'm a Ramblin' Man, Bob Wills is Still the King, Pick Up the Tempo, Good-Hearted Woman, House of the Rising Sun, Me and Bobby McGee, and This Time. And, you know, what's funny is at the time, Waylon was having more success, 1974, than Willie was, record sales-wise. But Willie was bigger in Texas. Willie's always been he's the biggest artist in Texas. That's just how it is. He has been since he went back, and he will be forever and ever. Waylon was a little jealous of that. And when he sang Bob Wills is Still the King, he actually wrote that in part to spite Willie. And Willie was in the rafters. And Waylon was a little hopped up, and I guess when he was recording this, he sort of looked back at Willie and sort of tried to needle him, and Willie just laughed, because that's what Willie Nelson does. He's got a great sense of humor. But they remained best friends until Waylon passed 20 years ago today. I know this is a lot of information to take in, but so when I heard this, the authenticity, the purity, the emotion, the soul that was in this, plus attitude. 20, 21 years old, young man. I related, as I get older, I probably relate more to Willie and some of the others, but at that time, I really related most to Waylon and his attitude and how he was. And he's kind of who I wanted to be at the time, and thank goodness I didn't turn out like him. I wouldn't have been able to handle it. But this is such a fantastic album. I cannot say enough about it. So we jump ahead a little bit. Waylon, by the late 70s, early 80s, by his own admission, had a very bad cocaine habit. He was snorting $1,500 worth a day. I don't even know what that is in 2022 money, but that just sounds ridiculous. And he finally knew he had to give it up when his youngest son, Shooter, who is a very prolific and established and successful recording artist in his own right and producer, said, "Look, I'm Daddy." And he took a straw and pretended to snort a line, and Waylon was like, "Oh, that's it, I have to be done." And so, there are a lot of stories of Waylon in the 70s, about being busted and flushing the stuff down the toilet and everything. And anyway, so he got clean, and he started to have some success again. His records were a little less successful each time. They were a little less focused, a little more unfocused. And then, as happenstance would have it, his old friend Johnny Cash was doing a Christmas special in, I forget which European country. I should have written it down. But anyway, Monte Carlo maybe. I don't know. Anyway, John brought Willie and Christopherson and Waylon along. And they got along so well that they did the Highwaymen album. And this is from when Cash was 70, and coming up Cash would be 90, so this is a 20-year-old CD. The title track, of course, remains just a classic. Glenn Campbell had actually done it, and Marty Stewart, who was in Cash's band at the time, found the song. Not everybody is on every song. They do a really good cover of Bob Seger's Against the Wind. They cover John Prine's The 20th Century is Almost Over. Big River is really a great one on here. They cover John's song. They add an extra verse for it. They cover Guy Clark's Desperados, Waiting for a Train. So it's a really good album. And then the next one came out 5 years later, Highwaymen 2. It was a little less successful, I think, because by then hat country had happened. You know, you had to have a cowboy hat, and it was starting to become a bit more poppy again, etc., etc. But Silver Stallion, Born and Raised in Black and White, is a great one. That's really a Waylon song. We're All in Your Corner. American Remains is kind of a rehashing of the Highwaymen. Angels Love Bad Men is a really good one. Songs That Made a Difference, Living Legend. So there's some really good, strong material on here. I don't care for these as much because Chips Moman, his production was too slick. The 80s, you know, kind of hurt country music. So my favorite of the three albums, and this is an original CD pressing, there is a remaster that has a couple of bonus tracks, but The Road Goes On Forever. The great Robert Earl Keen song is the title track here. They open with the Steve Earle song, The Devil's Right Hand, which I was going to point out was on Waylon's his sort of big comeback solo studio record, Will the Wolf Survive? Great song, and then that ends with The Devil's Right Hand, Working Without a Net, The Shadow of Your Distant Friend. Great songs on here. But anyway, this one is really a group effort. You know, they were older, wiser. Voices were a little rougher, edgier. Each one does one song on their own, but then, you know, they go from Steve Earle, The Devil's Right Hand, into covering Billy Joe Shaver's Live Forever. Just, what a 1-2 punch on there. True Love Travels a Gravel Road, which I think Elvis Presley had done years before. And then The Road Goes On Forever, and a bunch of songs in between. So this is actually, if you want real country music unpolished, this is it right here. The last Highwaymen record is easily the best. I apologize for being kind of disjointed, you know, because there's so much to go over, and we're already over 20 minutes on the video. The last album Waylon and Willie did was called Clean Shirt. There were no hits on here. This was done at a time in 1991 when Willie was in the middle of trying to pay back his taxes from the whole big IRS scandal. This one was literally just put together. They each sing on, you know, half the songs. This is the most fun, enjoyable album that they did because there's no pressure. They're not trying to sell albums. It's literally just two old friends in the studio writing good songs and having fun. So if I can find a clean shirt, I could write a book about you. Old Age and Treachery, I love it. Two Old Sidewinders, Trying to Outrun the Wind, The Good Old Nights, Guitars That Won't Stay in Tune, The Makings of a Song, Put Me on a Train Back to Texas, and then the last song, kind of an epic one called Rocks from Rolling Stones. Do yourselves a favor. I don't think a lot of people have heard of this one. Find Waylon and Willie, If I Can Find a Clean Shirt. They did a total of 4 albums. They did Waylon and Willie, they did WW2, then they did Take It to the Limit, and each one sort of got a little less immediate. But by this point, you know, again, no hits on here, but if you want just a fun album, that's it. So by the 90s, of course, Waylon he'd been sober for quite a while. He had really reached living legend status. And he was sort of semi-retired. He was living back out in Arizona. um, and with his wife Jessie, and she was still is a prolific artist. She hasn't put too many albums out, but she was a great singer-songwriter in her own right. So the last album to come out, and while Waylon was alive, there was a TV special called Never Say Die Live. It was a film. It was a concert film, and then a CD as well. I don't have the remastered version. There is a 2-disc set with the entire show. The great song Closing In on the Fire, which I believe was a Tony Joe White song. Not my favorite album, but not my least favorite either. Never Say Die. He does a cover of Dobie Gray's Drift Away, and he ends with the Doobies, Can't You See? But he duets with Travis Tritt on I've Always Been Crazy. Going Down Rockin' is on here. Montgomery Gentry's on I'm a Ramblin' Man. Jesse's on here singing I'm Not Lisa and Storms Never Last. Good Hearted Woman. So there's a lot of good material, and I appreciate it probably more now than I did back then. Especially knowing what we know. Waylon played the entire set basically seated on a stool, playing his Telecaster. He was a phenomenal guitar picker too. His voice wasn't as strong here as it had been over the years, but he had a really rough, raspy voice. But it's still warm. It's still inviting. He had actually lost a foot to diabetes, and at the time nobody knew it. And so he was down to only playing a handful of shows a year. He never ended up releasing another studio record while he was alive. There have been a number, and like I say, we're already running quite long here on this video. There have been a number of posthumous releases of studio material that was recorded and put together. Record Store Day a couple of years ago, they put out a live record that was sort of a sequel to Waylon Live that's almost as good. An album of all acoustic music, just Waylon and his guitar, and hearing that stripped down. I mean, the demos basically that he did. There's another one called Outlaw Stuff that Shooter Jennings and his band helped put together. So Waylon's music is still with us, and like I say, I spoke earlier, so I don't want to repeat myself a whole lot. It was just so genuine, so authentic, especially starting in the early 70s. Waylon never did anything he didn't want to do. I'm really surprised that at some point he and Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead didn't overlap or get to know each other. Excuse me. And so every album he did, it was what he wanted, and it showed. Not every song was great, not every album was great, but the ones that were are phenomenal, and I've tried to highlight those here. Again, these are just starting points. There's so much more. I've got a bunch more CDs, more albums up there. You can only talk about so much in half an hour, and so I simply leave you on this video by saying thank you to Waylon, because without him, music as we know it, the creative freedom that artists enjoyed for so long, wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have gotten so much great music in the 70s if it weren't for him. Unfortunately, Nashville is kind of back to being a Nashville establishment again, and I'm not going to get into all the politics and the nonsense, but it's pretty much being run by Music Row again, and the most interesting music is not coming out of straight up Nashville again. It's coming out of East Nashville. It's coming out of Texas. It's coming out of the red dirt country. It's coming out of the Carolinas and Georgia and Appalachia. There's not really a lot of country music straight out of Nashville. It's even real country music anymore. And that's what Waylon really fought against, was, to have artistic freedom, and it just doesn't exist in mainstream quote-unquote country, and it's not really country, and I'm not going to argue about it. I'm just going to tell you how it is. So anyway, Waylon is somebody we can look back to and be thankful for his music, and I am. I appreciated it a lot then for the attitude. I appreciate it more now for the songwriting skill, for the interpretation, for the musicianship, as well as the attitude. And so here's to you. I have a little bit of my uh, Yorkshire Gold left. I don't think Waylon would have, saluted with tea, but that's okay. So anyway, thank you all for your kind attention. I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to doing another video and talking with you soon. As always, leave comments below. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your favorite Waylon albums are. Let me know if you disagree or agree with these. Please do it respectfully, as I always ask. In all these videos, I've only had to delete one troll so far, so maybe I just cursed myself by saying that, but so far, pretty good luck. Take care of yourselves. Bye.